welcome to Point Blank Podcast. My name is Donna Anthony. I'm a retired police officer from Alaska, and I'm the owner of Point Blank Firearms and Self-Defense Training. Welcome. Our show is about faith, family, firearms, and our freedoms. We see this as being attacked a little bit more than we've ever seen. And this episode, I think you're going to like it. This episode, have you ever struggled with who's behind BLM and Antifa, and who are they connected to? So today, we're actually going to talk about that on our show. I'm very excited to bring our very first guest speaker here will be John Godola. John Godola, thank you so much for being on the show. Before we get started, can you tell the audience about your training and experience to show that you're an expert on this topic? Because I know this is a hot topic out there.
Absolutely. So first of all, thank you for having me, and congratulations on your new podcast. I think it's awesome, and it really is patriots like you talking to patriots at the ground level that are going to get the word out, because as you know, we've been shut down around the country and even in Europe from speaking the truth. So I'm grateful to be on here. So my background is I grew up in Maryland, went to the Naval Academy, took a commission in the Marine Corps. I'm a combat veteran Marine officer, infantry and reconnaissance officer, and left the Marine Corps and joined the FBI. And shortly after 9/11, began an assignment in the counterterrorism division, and through specific investigations came to understand that there is a significant and massive Islamic movement in the United States, jihadi movement, and that all of the key organizations, Islamic organizations, are part of that movement. And that was a bit stunning for me. And then I actually began sharing this with other agents and police officers. And in 2006, actually put together and implemented the very first training in the government on the Muslim Brotherhood, their doctrine, their networks, their modus operandi, and how federal, state, and local law enforcement can investigate them and dismantle these networks at any of those and all of those levels. Excuse me. The probably a couple years after I started doing that in 2008, after this first training program, which was August 2006, and the response to the training, we had people from every three-letter agency there, Department of Justice, state and local police from all over the country. We invited task force officers from 10 different states, and obviously the Maryland, DC, Virginia area. So their response to the training was that their minds were blown, and they wanted to know why this wasn't being taught to everybody. Yeah. And so a couple years later, less than 2 years later, ran into some gentlemen that had a lot of experience in the communist movement in the United States. And at that point, my understanding of it was, I would say, I had a framework of it. I understood the history, but I did not understand the networks and how they operated the way I did on the jihadi Islamic side. And so I began working with them and studying, and we began incorporating that into work we were doing and training we were doing as early as 2008, 2009 in the government. And what's interesting is at the end of 2008, I got recruited out of the government by the Department of Defense to do strategic analysis and consulting with senior government officials. And I just want to say very briefly that through all of this, what the DoD had myself and my colleague doing was speaking with 3- and 4-star generals and admirals, retired CIA, FBI, Defense Intelligence directors, national security advisors to the president, attorney generals. These are the kinds of people we were briefing. Numerous members of Congress, including chairman of the Intelligence Committee, the Homeland Security Committee, those kinds of individuals. And I was shocked because I never briefed or worked with any member of Congress, any leader, any 3- or 4-star general or admiral that had any understanding about what we were talking about. And it was clear that we were engaged in wars, both kinetic and non-kinetic, in the United States against the communist and Islamic movements. And our leadership had no understanding of what drove these folks, why they were fighting. We were just fighting the people that were shooting at us. And our military, of course, crushed the enemy on the battlefield, but we lost the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, Syria, Central Africa, et cetera. And it's because we never identified the threats. And to this day, there's no unified, at the federal level, no unified federal, state, and local response to this. And that's where we find ourselves today. And quite frankly, that's why understanding the threat, my organization, even exists. Because if the government were doing their job, we wouldn't have a need to do what we're doing.
I'm so glad you're taking all your training experience and you're still continuing with this. It's very frustrating to hear that you've got generals and individuals with CIA, everybody involved. They don't seem to understand the threat. Like you said, we're winning the battle on the field, but they're not really truly understanding the threat. So let me ask you a couple of questions that I have written down here. Do you have some time for this for me?
Absolutely.
First, is it true there's a connection between Black Lives Matter and the Communist Party?
Yes.
Can you explain?
Yes, it's more than that there's a connection. Black Lives Matter is a communist organization. It was created by the largest Chinese-backed communist organization in the United States. So it wasn't taken over or isn't linked. It is a communist organization. It was built to be that. It was created to be that. So the organization, Freedom Road Socialist Organization, at the time was the largest Chinese-backed communist organization in America. And the three founders of Black Lives Matters, Patrisse Cullors, Opal Tometi, and Alicia Garza, they were all in senior leadership positions in Freedom Road Socialist Organization. Now, Freedom Road is an umbrella organization of numerous communist organizations. And so these three women held leadership positions in many of those. And so when Black Lives Matter was created out of Freedom Road, they became the leaders. So they were already leaders, communist leaders in the United States. And so they out of Freedom Road Socialist Organization, stood up Black Lives Matter about 8 years ago.
8 years ago. So, my background is law enforcement. This is how you and I met, because I worked some terrorism and I was part of the SARS, SAR, it's a SARS task force, and we'd follow the money. Why is the government not following the money on this? I mean, I'm just shocked.
Well, I think it begins with, let me just step back and say, in my experience, and I know you and I have talked about this before this podcast, that police and federal agencies and state investigative agencies, since, and I would argue before 9/11, they focus on violence. They focus on what, from a military standpoint, the kinetic aspect of the war. So if you get a threat that someone wants to shoot someone or bomb something or take over a school, or there's a guy on the internet saying he wants to commit an act of terrorism, then they're all over that. They create an undercover maybe, or they just start investigating it. And eventually they go after the guy. And at a minimum, they interview him and maybe they arrest him. That's what, in my experience, almost 100% of the FBI's work, DHS's work, state law enforcement agencies and local law enforcement agencies focus on. That's it. A crime happens and you respond, or somebody is out there saying, I'm going to do this violent thing. And then they figure out, how do we deal with this? How do we shut this down before it gets really ugly?
And it sounds like, go ahead.
Well, the problem with that approach, and of course, local state police have had success in stopping things by doing that. However, 90% of the Islamic movement globally, and especially in Europe and the United States, and 90% of the communist movement, their actions are nonviolent. the most effective work they do is in the nonviolent realm. And this is where the federal government, the state and local governments do not, because they don't understand the threat, therefore they don't know how it manifests itself and they don't know what to do. And so what we do at Understanding the Threat is we help them use already established state and local laws to actually go after these people now. We work with state legislatures to actually create laws that we have already crafted and others we work with have already crafted. So we just give it to them because, for instance, Kansas and Texas have very strong sedition laws and laws on the books you can't conspire to overthrow the state constitution. Well, that is what these movements are doing. They're operating to overthrow state constitutions and the US Constitution and replace our form of government with something that is totalitarian. And so legally, that's a real challenge for local and state police and local and state officials, but it can be done. So that's the kind of, that's honestly the short answer to your question. There's much more to it, but
yeah, I know you got so much information, and I know we could go over an hour. My next question to you is, I know that you're now going around working with local law enforcement agencies. I'd love to have you up here in Alaska, but what's the feedback when you go to these agencies and you start giving this information? They've never even heard of it before. I mean, what's the response?
Well, it's interesting. Let me begin with the response, the unanimous response from state, local law enforcement officials and FBI Joint Terrorism Task Force people that have come through our training, National Guard, other first responders that have come through the program, intelligence professionals that have come through the program. 100% of them have said, and this goes back to when we first started doing it, we've never heard this information, but we believe it's critical to protecting our local community.
Yep.
That's after they've had the training. Prior to having the training, hostile groups, like the Southern Poverty Law Center, the ACLU, Hamas, the terrorist organization, doing business as the Council on American Islamic Relations, and other groups scream bloody murder that you shouldn't get trained from these people because, they hate people or they're teaching stuff that's not true. Well, that's a lie. And we always tell people, if you're going to slander us, we'll gladly take you to court. However, show us, name one thing or show one thing that we teach that's not factual and based on evidence. Counterterrorism trials that we reference and lay out the evidence to show who these people and who these had last week. Black Lives Matter publicly support the terrorist group Hamas. They said they stand with their brothers in Palestine against what Israel is doing. That was Hamas, the designated foreign terrorist organization. So these people are clear about who they are. We know where a lot of their money comes from. And let's just take your example and let's just walk this out for 30 seconds. Black Lives Matter is specifically tied to Asian for Black Lives, right? And other groups that are directly tied to the Communist Chinese Party here in the United States, specifically through the consulate in San Francisco, where these groups, Asians for Black Lives and other groups, are working directly with Communist Party officials at these places. And we have them on their own podcasts talking to their people saying it. So we can string this out. We can show the funding channel. We can show Black Lives Matter was created by the Communist Party here in the United States. So this is not speculation. What we do, right, as a former FBI agent who prosecuted both, who investigated and testified at trials and worked with US attorneys and put people in jail, whether it was threat cases or narcotics cases or terrorism cases, we know, you and I both know, that facts matter, evidence matters.
Yep.
That's how we do what we do. The people on the other side that are working with these hostile groups, Hamas doing business as CARE and others, other Muslim Brotherhood organizations, or these groups like Southern Poverty Law Center that started out doing good work and now support our enemies that are hostile. And they're the ones standing up screaming bloody murder that you can't let UTT come in and train you. Well, show us what we're saying is incorrect. It's factually wrong, and we'll stop teaching it. But they know they can't, so they have to attack us personally. They have to slander us to stop it. I will tell you that we have on our website support from police officers, from county attorneys' offices. We have, because of our work, county attorneys and police around the country have said we've initiated investigations and are doing other work as a direct result of the training from understanding the threat and the consultation that follows. So the proof's in the pudding, and you can read what assistant U.S. attorneys have said about us, what police officers at the local state level, what FBI agents have said about our training. And it's unpopular because this is an unpopular message right now.
Yeah.
But if you want to actually put rounds on target, proverbially, but investigatively or practically, we're helping people do it, and we're the only ones in the country doing it.
I wish I would have known you years ago. Like you and I talked about it. I've worked a terrorism case and from a traffic stop just in Alaska, which led to some great information, and that's not even public, along with a 2-year operation. I think Alaskans don't think it's in Alaska. And are they? What would you say to that?
Well, I would say the last case I worked in the FBI, I was part of a team working in Alaska, and we were from Washington, D.C. We were requested to come help because you've got a lot of jihadi organizations and leaders there, and communist organizations working in Alaska that are doing the same thing there that they're doing in cities and states across the entire continental United States. So yeah, they are there.
Yeah, I'm aware of this, but I don't think a lot of our legislators, our politicians really even understand what's going on. That's why I'd love to bring you up eventually up to Alaska. I know we talked about trying to get you up in around August, September, and we'll get the website out for everyone when we can post when you're going to come up. But I had some more questions here. Another question I have is, how does what's happening in Israel have anything to do with what's happening in like my hometown?
Well, that is a great question. So let's draw it right down to your area. Hamas, first of all, is the organization that was rocketing for 11 days Israel. Hamas is an inherent part of the International Muslim Brotherhood. They're the what they call the Palestinian Muslim Brotherhood. That is Hamas. And so they're an inherent part of the Muslim Brotherhood. The same Muslim Brotherhood that is the leading entity in North America, leading what they call the Islamic movement. And they say that the purpose of this movement is to destroy un-Islamic governments and impose what they call Allah's divine law, Sharia, on every human being, Muslim and non-Muslim, and to overthrow the government and replace it with an Islamic state. In my home state of Texas, and by the way, in your home state of Alaska, they teach in the Islamic schools that's the duty, this is a quote, it's the duty of Muslims is to be loyal to the Islamic State, and that those who die in jihad automatically go to paradise. And they teach a whole lot of other stuff that's unpleasant. But that's being taught to children, 10, 11, 12-year-old in the Islamic schools. We know that because when we teach about these things, we use the books they use in their schools to teach each other. That's how we teach. Like, this is what they're teaching each other. And by the way, here's Islamic doctrine, and this is authoritative, and here's what it says. And so when we talk about Islam, we talk about, and jihad, we talk about Islamic law, and we teach from authoritative books. We talk about communism, we use the Communist Manifesto and Rules from Radicals, because those are the books that they use to operationalize it on the ground. And when we talk about the networks, we have the networks, and we go through the history of the communist networks because we have 100 years of information whether it's declassified FBI investigations, the House Un-American Activities Committee, testimony from KGB officers that defected, testimony from Communist Party USA officials that defected, all the intercepts the United States has done since the 1940s, intercepting Soviet military traffic for 40 years, or senior KGB archivists that defected, and we have notes of all of their operations. We understand the network. So what understanding the threat does is we take all this information and we boil it down into a digestible amount, and we train people on these things. So why all that? And what has that got to do with tying rockets against Israel by Hamas back to Alaska? Well, because that same Muslim Brotherhood that's rocketing, because Hamas is the Muslim Brotherhood, rocketing Israel, is the same Muslim Brotherhood operating at for instance, the Islamic Center in Anchorage. That's a Muslim Brotherhood mosque. That's the mosque we were looking at because a senior Al-Qaeda guy showed up there a number of years ago when I was working the case, and we were watching them. We were paying attention to them. So these are the kinds of things that are happening right there in Alaska, and the people are unaware. And by the way, when the investigation's going on, they should be unaware, but they should know that these networks are there and they exist. And the last thing I'll say about this is, if you look at all of the physical, the kinetic, the violent attacks in the United States since 9/11, the jihadi attacks, you can trace them to a Muslim Brotherhood support. So the two guys that tried to kill people in Garland, Texas, came from the Muslim Brotherhood's Islamic Community Center, Phoenix. The young jihadi in Chattanooga, Tennessee, that killed 4 Marines and a Navy sailor came out of the Islamic Society of Chattanooga, Muslim Brotherhood.
Yeah.
The Fort Hood shooter, Major Nadal Hassan, came out of the Muslim Brotherhood's Dar al-Hijra Mosque in Falls Church, Virginia, Muslim Brotherhood. And we can go on and on with this. So that network exists, and that's how it's directly tied to these things we're seeing right now in real time.
Yeah, thank you to explain that, because I really want Alaskans to understand that. I don't want them to have the attitude of it can't happen here, it's not going to happen in Alaska. It's been there, it's there. So thank you for explaining that. So, and
by the way, your own investigative work shows you that it's there.
Yes, but I've not spoke about what I've done, and I'm hoping that with this podcast that maybe some politicians would love to sit down with you. There's so much happening in Alaska that people just don't really understand. So
that's right.
Yeah, so thank you for giving the history and the background, and even that you're up there says a lot. And what I worked on, I was a naive officer. Nobody taught me anything. I fell into it, and I fell into it hard. And a couple of people thought we were crazy, like this can't happen in Alaska, but it's happening. So
yes, it is there.
So I'm hoping that we can bring you up here for some law enforcement training and work with our politicians. I also know you're doing some civilian training too. Is that correct? You're starting from the ground up.
That's right. We have strategies at the national level, at the state level, but I think the most effective thing that understanding the threat is doing is training citizens how to map out the communist and jihadi networks in their local area and giving them tools that empowers them to actually disrupt and dismantle these networks very aggressively and lawfully, with or without law enforcement help. Now, what is really good are the areas in the country, because we have now built teams around the United States where you have a sheriff that understands these threats or understands that he doesn't quite get it, for instance. The sheriff then says, help us, train us, and we train them. And at the same time, we help build a team in the local area or multiple teams of people, and they actually work together. It's really cool and it's very effective. But the point is, there are citizens out there who understand this stuff better than law enforcement because they're not encumbered. Like a lot of local police believe, hey, if we needed to know something, the FBI is going to tell us. Let me be very clear. The training I ran in August of 2006 on these matters, and the one follow-on I did at the request of the U.S. Park Police, and we included a lot of state and local police in this, which was run in December and January of 2006, 2007, respectively. That was the last time these programs were run inside the government. So you now have 15 years of FBI agents, new agents and experienced agents that have no idea because they haven't been trained in it. And I can tell you from guys and gals I still talk to in the FBI that it's a train wreck. Good people, but they just, like you just said, you didn't know.
I didn't know. And, I ran this operation and it led to a lot of different things. And it was a 2-year operation and it was shut down. There was some corruption, I'm going to say, probably within our state. So I was shut down. So that's why I really want our politicians, I want the public to know what's going on. I want them to get educated. I want them to get involved. This is community. The community has to come together. We have to support this. So I love that you're doing this for civilians. You're bringing them involved. And they're going to work with law enforcement. I think it's a great network. But I have some more questions. Can I ask you some more questions?
You can. Because of what you just said, let me just put one cherry on top of that point. And that is because of now I'm going to talk from a military warfighting perspective. Because of the nature of the wars, you've got literally foreign-backed organizations in the United States, Chinese-backed, as well as other hostile entities backed by Turkey and Qatar and Iran here in the United States. So this is at a strategic level, this is a war, both from the communist side and the jihadi side. And because of their networks and the size of their networks, that they have thousands of organizations in the United States, and because of the way in which they're fighting, mostly nonviolent, in the counterintelligence and espionage realm, propaganda, information operations, this is really deep warfare that most Americans, and quite frankly, most American generals and admirals don't understand, because of the nature in which this is being fought. The way that this has to be won in a counterinsurgency is at the local level.
Yes.
So what people in Alaska need to understand is their local citizens and local police are at the very tip of the spear in this entire war. And if they don't understand that and don't come to understand that very quickly, we will lose. And we are losing right now badly.
Yes, I agree with you. I'm very concerned, and that's why I'm having you on the show here. I was also concerned where we have the Chinese that were trying to come in and do the LNP, or it's for the oil up in Alaska. They're trying to get involved with our oil companies in Alaska. This is concerning. Right. So the public came out and spoke out against that, which was good. But I'm concerned of what we're seeing. Let me go ahead with some more questions here, because you and I can go off topic because there's so much information. It's really good information. So here's the other question I have. I've heard that the terrorists or jihads from groups like Hamas and the Muslim Brotherhood and Al-Qaeda work with communist groups like Antifa and Black Lives Matter. Why would communists and jihad work together?
Okay, so the organizations and the leaders from the communist movement, the Islamic movement, the jihadi movement, they both have a goal that they've stated. And when we do, for instance, our law enforcement program, we use their stuff and their words, like affidavits from FBI cases, where they're quoting source information, or they're quoting the subject of the investigation, either on a wiretap or in a recorded conversation with a source or a UC. We're quoting their testimony in court. And they say on the Islamic side, what we're doing is we are waging war to establish an Islamic state under Islamic law. On the communist side, they say we are fighting for a totalitarian system under communism. That's what their doctrine says. And to do that, we have to overthrow these, quote, capitalistic governments that oppress people. That's the mantra, right? So they come at it from a little different angle, but the goal for both is to overthrow the Republican form of government and impose a totalitarian system. So that's where they meet and merge. And it's not just that they're working together. At the international level, last August, you had communist China enter into a formal strategic partnership with Iran, the largest state sponsor, the Islamic Republic of Iran, the largest state sponsor of terrorism on the planet.
That's scary. Yeah.
At the national level, we have on video the leader of the North American Muslim Brotherhood and Hamas in the US, Nihad Awad, saying at a Muslim Brotherhood conference 5 years ago in Chicago, Black Lives Matter is our matter. Their campaign is our campaign. And then we see the leaders working together. At the street level, we see Muslim Brotherhood groups like the Islamic Society of North America, the Islamic Circle of North America, the Muslim American Society, Muslim Student Association, and the Muslim Brotherhood group, which is a Hamas group, Council on American Islamic Relations, CAIR, CAIR, working with Antifa and Black Lives Matter at the local level. We've even got in those George Floyd protests, some of the signs, and especially in like Minneapolis, they actually have the CAIR logo on it. So, I mean, there you go. You've got communist rallies where they've got Socialist Workers Party, which is communist, for those of you who don't know, that's a communist entity, with signs saying, you know, we support Muslims and LGBT. And, you know, which of course is absurd because under Islamic law, homosexuals are executed.
Right.
So the level of like disconnect from reality from some of these groups is incredible, but it doesn't matter. Again, propaganda and the information operations, the nonviolent stuff that they're doing to advance the cause is the main line of effort for these people. It's not the violence. The violence is meant to get our leadership to do what the other side wants, and it's very effective.
Yeah, it's very effective. So why does it feel like it's very difficult to find out the truth about what's going on?
Because information operations is propaganda is the enemy's number one line of operations. Their goal, their number one goal, besides their final objective, their primary line of operation, if you will, is to control the narratives so that they control the war.
Okay.
So I'll give you a couple examples. So for people who have no idea what I'm talking about, when they say America is systemically racist and police brutality is out of control against blacks, that's the narrative and they control it. And then the traditional media regurgitates it. You know, they put it right out there. And then the Democrat leadership regurgitates it and puts it out there. And the GOP leadership, like Nikki Haley and George W. Bush and Mitt Romney and Mitch McConnell, they regurgitate it. This is not a political issue. This is a national security issue.
Yes,
and so now you've got Americans who, well, they're looking at all this, say, well, this must be true. We must have a real police brutality problem against the black community. Except when you look at FBI statistics and you look at the actual statistics against files claimed against police officers, you find out that factually that's a lie. Sure. When you look at people who claim there's systemic racism and you ask, please show us systemically. Of course, in 330 million people in America, there are a lot of good people and there are some people that are idiots, that are morons, that are bad people. Yeah, there are. And some of those people individually are racist. To say America is systemically racist, we have yet in our analysis to find evidence of that. And we've asked people, leaders of the other side, please show us. We've read your articles where you've made accusations, but we're professionals. So please show us, and they can't. And so in just those two examples, they say, you know, but to be clear, the communists and the jihadis, they don't care about systemic racism. Communists don't care about police brutality. They actually would welcome it. But a systemic police brutality doesn't exist in the United States. Number one. and it certainly doesn't exist against any group of Americans, right? The idea that they care about climate change or they care about any of the issue is never the issue for the communists and the jihadis. It is a narrative that they control in order to get political change, in order to advance their movement. That's why they use it. And we teach this so that by the time someone's done with day 2 of our 3-day law enforcement program, for instance, they like you see the light bulbs going on.
Yeah.
It's really by the end of day 1, they realize, holy cow, like everything you're experiencing right now is the intentional outcome of a 100-year communist movement in the United States and about a 60-year jihadi movement in the United States. And all we do is we just lay it out and show them. And you can't deny it once you understand what's actually going on, how they're doing it.
So let me ask you another question. We have the squad in Congress. What's your thoughts of the squad, especially with, Hamas and Jerusalem and with Israel, and you hear their comments? These are politicians making these comments. What's your thoughts of that?
Well, when I think when an American politician openly supports a designated terrorist organization, I think they should be interviewed by the FBI, and they should be looked at, because not from a freedom of speech issue, from if somebody's bold enough in that position to speak out against a terrorist, in favor of a terrorist organization, I think that lends to reasonable suspicion they might be supporting them in other ways. And when you publicly look at, some of these people have called for violence against the president, violence against President Trump, violence against the United States on social media, have supported like the Ayatollah Khomeini, who initiated the 1979 revolution, and they support these things from, as a former investigator, and somebody who we still run investigations, that's at least reasonable suspicion that there's something going on. And when you look at the totality of their actions and their comments, there's reasonable suspicion to believe that they are actually supporting these Muslim Brotherhood and terrorist groups. And that requires then a little more investigation. And so far, none of these people have been brought under investigation by the FBI and DOJ.
Yeah, and that's my frustration being a police officer. I'm seeing enough reasonable suspicion to conduct an investigation. Why is this not being done? I know it's a out there question, but why is it not being done?
Well, I go back to you've got at the agent level in the FBI and at the state investigative level in like state departments of public safety or state investigative agencies. And of course, they're called different things in different states. There's no understanding of this, number one. At the leadership level of the FBI is utterly corrupt. And I think we saw that with the fact that, let me just point a few things out. James Comey, I would ask your viewers, how many of you knew he was a communist?
Yeah.
And this isn't my speculation. James Comey himself, in a October 2003 New York Magazine article, said, "I was a communist. Now I'm trying to find my way." How does a guy like that be even considered to be the director of the FBI, much less become the director of the FBI? I would argue that that is prima facie evidence that the process is corrupted and that the FBI at the leadership level is corrupted. Now, you also have 3 senior FBI executives, the director, James Comey, the deputy director, Andrew McCabe, assistant director for counterintelligence, Peter Strzok, involved in a coup against the president of the United States, where we now know information was presented to the FISA court that was false, meaning they lied and they swore an oath that they were telling the truth in order to conduct unlawful surveillance of Mr. Trump, his family, and his administration. Just from an objective standpoint, that violates so many laws that these people should have been charged and arrested for that.
Absolutely.
Now, so when you ask a question, why isn't the FBI doing, well, the senior leadership of the FBI has proven to be utterly corrupt and criminal. These are matters of not only violating federal code in those manners, this is treason and sedition and conspiring to overthrow the US government. These are capital crimes, by the way.
Yeah. Yeah.
And these are senior FBI officials still not held accountable under the law.
What do we do?
Well, so the answer to that, when Americans ask, what can I do? That's what understanding the threat does, is we give citizens tools to get involved at multiple layers. And we tell people, get trained and get in the fight or fund the war effort. Those are the two things we ask people to do. When we say get trained and get involved, we give people the ability. If you want to learn how to speak with your local officials, how to speak with your pastor, how to speak with business leaders, how to speak with people on your local school board, you want to speak with your city council officials. We teach people and train people how to do that, to effectively engage them. If you want to actually be part of the team that learns how to map out and research these networks and disrupt them, get in the middle of what they're doing and screw with their operations and dismantle these organizations, we train you how to aggressively and lawfully do that.
And lawfully,
That's
I like
what
that.
we do.
How?
And,
go ahead. Yeah.
And when we can, as I mentioned earlier, if the local law enforcement says we want to be a part of that, hey, yeah, it's awesome you're training our citizens, but we want to do that. That's our duty. Well, that's good. Unfortunately, there are police chiefs, some, and sheriffs around the country that don't want to do that. They feel like it's too out of the box. We can't do it. That's the FBI's job.
It just shocks me. Just shocks me. I'm just jumping out of my chair out of this.
Now, here's what I would say to all those sheriffs and police chiefs. You swore an oath. Yep. You have a legal duty to protect the citizens under your jurisdiction. It's not, you don't get to say, well, that's the FBI's job. It's your job.
It's your job.
And you've got to do it because the FBI is failing to do it. Look, there are great and patriotic FBI agents all over the country, but the leadership of the Bureau has catastrophically failed them. The evidence is on the table for everyone to see.
Great information, John. If people want to take your civilian course or law enforcement course, how can they reach out to you?
So we encourage everybody, you can go, first of all, go to our website, understandingthethreat.com. Look at the resource, look at the free resources that are there.
I went there. Amazing. There's so much. You can be on there all day.
Yeah. Read just some of the evidence of what is actually going on. We have DVDs, we have books, all of that stuff. You can get those and order those from the website. But the key is the training. There are 3 key trainings that we do. Now, we do a whole bunch of training. We do leadership training. We do tactical training. We do training for narcotics officers, for other investigators. There's all kinds of training we do, analyst courses. But the 3 key, the real gateway for civilians, the program is called Into Action. And that's 3 days where we teach you about these threats, how to actually share this information with others with whom you already have a relationship, and then how to build a team at the local level. And that's the beginning. For law enforcement, we have our understanding and investigating hostile threat networks, which is primarily the jihadi networks and the communist networks, because most police officers, most detectives, most police chiefs and sheriffs, they feel like that's beyond us. We can't do that. And what we're saying is, yes, you can. It's very simple. And there's if you're a tactical officer, we talk about how knowing this information directly impacts how you do your job and how you respond to certain things. If you're a detective, here are some investigative strategies. If you're a patrol officer, here are things to keep an eye out for. And here is when you're the red flags, your radar should go up. All of those things we teach them. And that's for National Guard, first responders, police officers. And the third training program is our 2-week train the trainer. And we do that online and in person. And there's a very deep dive into these things, but this teaches people how to train others on this material that we're talking about here, and how to actually get them engaged and involved in strategizing at the local level, because that's where we win or lose this war. So we encourage you to contact us either through our contact page on the website and say, I want to get this training. I want to build a team at my local level. Or you can email directly at info at understandingthethreat.com. And we will, our response time is pretty quick. We'll get back to you, start to get some information from you, and start to figure out when you can get plugged into the training. The other thing I would say for people who have the wherewithal to do is we need the resources to help us train law enforcement and citizens to do these things, because this is a team effort. This is a community, as you said, effort. And we need Americans to get, and listen, our Freedom Fund, we would ask, just donate something, $25 a month. That is a huge deal. But for people that have the wherewithal to do more, $100 a month, $250 a month, $500 a month, or if you're somebody of significant resources, contact us, and I will specifically reach out and we will talk to you about significant donations, because we have a nonprofit, Americans for America, that people can donate to, and we are partnered with them, and it is a fantastic way to get in the fight if you don't feel like you have the ability to, I'm not a public speaker, or I really don't want to get involved in these ways. That's not me, but I have resources I'd like to share. And that is as important as anything else. Just like in any other major effort, we have got to get the citizens and law enforcement trained, and we need the resources to do so.
We do, absolutely. And I'm so glad you came on the show. I want to bring you up to Alaska, one for a civilian side and for a law enforcement side. So, John, the information you provided, I know we're pretty much out of time here. So much great information, and I know it's going to shock some people, but it's factual information, and people have got to look at the truth here. And this is a war. We're in a war right now, and the community and law enforcement have to stand together, and we've got to fight this war together. I want to thank our listeners for joining. If you are interested in taking one of your classes up in Alaska, please go to our website, pointblank.ak.com. That again is pointblank.ak.com. We're also on Facebook. Once we get the dates locked in, we will share this information throughout Alaska. I'm hoping everybody comes in to listen to you. John, I'd love to have you get on the show if possible. Is that an opportunity for more information if we have more questions?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And I want to say to you, thank you for doing what you're doing. It takes courage and boldness. Just in today's world, speaking truth factually can be a dangerous thing. Yep. So I'm really glad you did this, and I look forward to coming up there with my team to Alaska and sharing this and training law enforcement, working with state legislators. I didn't mention it. We have a phenomenal team. Two of our team members, one spent 20 years in the Kansas legislature, and John Bennett, who's our vice president, spent 8 years in the Oklahoma legislature. We have an amazing team. Our team and the people we work with daily are the best in the country at what they do. And we're really looking forward to getting up there to Alaska. So we're hopeful it will all work out.
Yeah, thank you so much, John. Thank you for your time. I do appreciate it.
Thank you. God bless you.